All right, so for everyone else, if you would, if you have camera capability, we'd love to see your faces. This is going to be a very interactive session. And so I hope you brought your thinking mind and your need to assist your peers and collaboration and thought process. So just to talk to you a little bit about how this session will go, it's a little different than some of the others. Because of the content, we had to break this into two sessions. So you should have all received an email from Katie Bustamante with your pre-work, and hopefully you've done that. If you haven't, don't panic. What we were asking is that everyone come with a real urgent leadership challenge. Um, and um, and so if you did not have the opportunity to do your pre-work, just be thinking about a real life urgent problem in leadership that you need to solve that this group can help you with. And we'll be asking that you give just a 60 or 90-second summary of that a little later. In the first block, we're really going to be focused on learning, and we're going to learn about powerful questions and the action learning process. And then in the second block, we'll come back from break and we'll actually jump into an action learning session so that you can see how that plays out. You'll have an action learning coach with you. It will be an abbreviated session because we're just limited on time. But I think we'll get enough of the exercise done that you'll see how it flows, and then I'll be providing some resources afterwards that you can replicate back at home. So Marcus, before we jump into the content, I don't know if you wanted to do any words or introductions or anything. I skipped over that one presentation, but I realize it's a completely different group, lots of different faces, so they may not know who I am. Everyone knows you.
No, they don't. I hope not, anyways. I won't. The first session today, I got to read Cindy's bio with all of her accomplishments, and they are lengthy.
You can just like cut in half, just stop midway through.
I won't do that. I'll introduce myself and just real quick. Cindy, you can do the same. Mark with Goodwill Education Initiatives out of Indianapolis. I'm our national director for our national office. Prior to that, built that school at the Excel Center Richmond with an amazing team, was a lead teacher there, director. But for the last 5 years, my focus has been expanding this network nationally and helping our partners like those at Goodwill Industries of Arkansas get Excel Centers launched and successfully implementing and just working their magic, right? And making it fit the needs of their communities. And so I'm really excited that, the conference is kind of like my Super Bowl, because I get to work with all of these great folks across the country. And I know how amazing things are, but this is the time where we all get together and collaborate and everyone gets to see just the truly uniqueness of this network. So if I'm a little amped up, it's because today is a great day in my world. And I appreciate you guys for joining us for committing to 2 sessions with us. So that's me. Cindy, what do you got?
So my name is Cindy Varner. For those of you who haven't met, I do see some faces that I've seen before. Good to see you again. I serve as Vice President of Workforce Development for Goodwill Industries of Arkansas. In addition to the quasi-superintendent of our Excel Center, I also have responsibility for our career centers, our state licensed private career education school, our reentry programs, and serving individuals with disabilities. So Excel is one piece of my responsibility here at Goodwill, Arkansas. So I've been here, I just had my 3rd anniversary, which seems to have flown by in Goodwill years, but I've been here 3 years. I left a almost 20-year career with the state of Arkansas in workforce development, working with the state's workforce development system and the state workforce board. So it was a scary jump, best career move I've ever made in my life, and I love it here. So, all right, so I quickly went over the agenda for those of you who've joined us. If you have cameras, we would really appreciate you turning those on. This is going to be a very interactive session, and it certainly will help having everyone where we can see your faces and your interaction. So if you have that capability, we really would appreciate it if you would click that on. All of you should have received an email from Katie Bustamante where she sent out the pre-work. If you did not get it, or if you didn't have time to do it, don't panic. So what we were asking is that you come prepared today with a real life urgent leadership challenge that you are experiencing that you could use some help in solving. And we'll be talking more about that a little later. So if you didn't have a chance to do your pre-work, think about that, jot down as we're talking, jot down some bullet points of describing what that looks like. We will ask everyone to report out in a 60 to 90 second, very brief report out what your challenge is, so we get a kind of a good understanding of what it is. In the first block, we're gonna talk about powerful questions, and we're gonna talk about the action learning process. And then in the second block, we will do an action learning session. It will be abbreviated based on time, but you will have an action learning coach with you who has been through this process before and help to facilitate that. So I want to recognize on the screen Tennille Hunter. Tennille, if you will wave. Thank you. And Tammy Wheaton, who now is named Tammy Wheaton, not Cindy Varner. These two ladies are part of my team back at Goodwill, Arkansas, and they agreed to be on the session today to help facilitate as an action learning coach when we do the breakout. So in the second block, we will break out to have smaller groups just to facilitate the discussion better. So you're asking, why am I in this session? I hope something about the description piqued your thought process, and you felt like you could leave this with a tool in your toolbox to help you with leadership development. But really, we want you to think about throughout the session how you can transition to question thinking. So when I talk about question thinking, we're talking about using questions for greater results, not assuming that we have all of the information we need to make decisions, not using biases or assumptions in our thought process and our decision-making process, but really digging deep and using powerful questions, not just questions in general, but powerful questions to gather information, gather intel to help you form a decision. And the only way you actually use powerful questions is to bring other people in that you're asking questions of. So with appreciative inquiry, it's just wanting you to think about how you think when you're asking questions from a different way. So in the traditional problem solving process, you have a problem. Your logical next step is you're going to analyze the causes of that problem. The next step is you're going to come up with some solutions for solving it. And third, you're going to put those actions into place. So that's the traditional problem solving method. With appreciative inquiry, you're actually digging a little deeper than that, and you're looking at where do we excel, what are our best practices, what are the best of what we do, and how do we use that as a springboard. So you're going to be looking at what might we be. So you're going to be looking in the future. What's our destiny? Where do we want to go? What's our future plan? And you're going to take those two pieces of information and you're going to say what should be. So what should we put in place to get to where we are? And that includes dialogue. So you've got to sit down with your peers, with your staff, with others across the company, outside your silos, and gather that kind of information. And then being innovative in what will be and putting your action plan into place. So it's just a different way of solving challenges. And looking at it from a more positive perspective than everything's a problem and I've got to fix the problem. So question thinking helps leaders with a variety of things. I'm not going to read these to you. You can see them on the screen. But I want to point out that in order to be an effective leader, you have to build trust. And without trust, you have no influence. So with question thinking, you are bringing others in, you're collecting information from them that you didn't have, or it could even be a different perspective. So it's the same factual information, but it's slightly a different perspective that someone has that you don't have. And that's based on life experiences, education, work experience, personal experience. And how do you bring all of that into your decision-making process and to make sure that your decisions are more well-rounded? So it helps with delegation. It helps with empowerment. How do we better coach our employees to be more effective and to solve their own problems rather than always bringing them to us? I don't know about you, but I've experienced in the past where I start noticing I've got team members coming to me about every little thing. And why is that? What do I own in that? What have I not done to empower them to solve their own problems? And so my team gets real irritated at me sometimes that if they come to me with something, a lot of times I will shoot back a question versus saying, this is what we should do. So just changing your thought process. With asking powerful questions, it definitely generates curiosity and creativity. It stimulates conversation, and not just within your own team, but it can stimulate conversation across silos, across programs, across partners, across organizations. And it travels well. And what that means is it spreads. So we started this at Goodwill, Arkansas with our leadership team. Actually, Marcus and I started this in our senior leader program with Goodwill International. And I was so impressed with the process going into that. I thought I knew what my leadership challenge was that I took. It was nowhere near the issue I thought it was. It had completely different causes once you start digging into the underlying information. And so I brought that back, and Brian Marsh, our CEO, is on the session today. Glad to have him. He agreed that we could have a leader as part of our leadership planning meeting. Let's do an action learning session. And so it went really well, so well that we've drilled it down into the organization. We're using it with our managers and supervisors to help solve problems, but oftentimes we're solving the wrong problem initially. So helping us to reframe our challenges. So a book that I would highly recommend if you've not read it, it's by Marilee Adams. It's called Change Your Life, Change Your Questions. Excellent book that really digs into how do you reframe your mind to focus on question thinking. And so this is a diagram that she has in that book. I think it's very appropriate for the quote. As Albert Einstein said, we cannot solve our problems with the same thinking we used when we created them. We have to think innovatively and outside the box. And so looking at the choice map here, you can see in her book, she talks about two different mindsets. There's a learner mindset and there's a judger mindset. And so really being personally aware of where you are and what your thought process is. Are you in a learner mindset? Are you looking at what happened? How do I learn from this? How do I retool? How do I monitor and adjust? Or are you of a judger mindset where you're reacting and it's about why did I fail? What caused me to fail? Why did those people cause me to fail? Why did my staff cause me to fail? And it really can put you in what she calls the pit of despair. But it puts you in a mindset where you can't be effective and you can't be progressive. I think I see someone with the book. So that's excellent. I hope that you enjoyed it as much as I did. I saw the book in the background. Okay, Marcus, dimensions of powerful questions.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Cindy. I think I would first start by saying our team at Goodwill, Indiana decided that we were all going to be in different locations today because we've had some crazy weather. And unfortunately, my location, it's going crazy outside right now. So if you lose me, Cindy, you're in charge. I'm glad that they're in charge, Arkansas contingent, so that you're not left alone. So just wanted to throw that out there. You may be the host here soon. So as we look at the slide 6, I'd first like to be a bad teacher and read the quote, but I think this quote is important, right? The problem with communication is the illusion that it has been accomplished, right? George Bernard Shaw. And so when we look at the dimensions of powerful questions, I want that quote to kind of stick with you. And so no fault, circle of trust here, I guess it's squares of trust. By a show of hands, how many of you can say, I can't remember that you have said this. Raise your hand if you've said it. I can't remember which Zoom I was on or who was on it, but I said ... right? Time is relative, meaning it's all a blur right now. And so if you did not raise your hand, shoot me your phone number, because I need you as a life coach, because I feel like I have to preface everything I say with those words. On a side note, I would say that Ashley Jewett would tell you that that does not only apply to Zoom, that is in real life too. So the dimension of communication matters, right? And you all know that as leaders. And I would say that it's even more so now, right? Given the circumstances that we have, it's amplified immensely. And so being able to effectively communicate what we're thinking and the questions that we really want answered is of utmost importance right now for us leaders. And so when we dive into these three dimensions, it's not that the difficulty is in identifying our powerful questions. We're pretty good at that. The challenge comes in formulating them. And so if I were to ask you to, I'm trying to keep this very Excel Center specific, right? If I were to ask you to identify these three questions in order of least powerful to most powerful, I think you could do this pretty easily. So the first question would be, is student recruitment important at your Excel Center? I think we're all going to agree that that is very important. That's a simple question, yes or no. What is your school's enrollment goal? Might provoke a little more thought, right? You might have to think, is it 360? Is it 365? Again, kind of a level of a questioning. So you can rank those two in terms of most powerful. Then when you ask a question like, how do we maximize our efforts and efficiency when looking to expand the Excel Center and Goodwill mission, right? They're all three getting at the same thing. One is much more thought-provoking than the other two, right? So we're good at identifying. So hopefully today we're able to help you formulate those questions and come up with those rather than just being able to identify when someone asks you a really good question. And as we know, the challenge is when we're trying to move an organization forward towards innovative futures, and that's what we're all trying to do. When I think of Excel Center, I think innovation. Research shows that the following three dimensions are going to help us get there in our questioning. And so as we move to slide 7, Cindy, can you move to slide 7? There we go. The first thing I would like to note as you're kind of taking in this visual is that the linguistic construction matters, right? I think we've all probably been on a job interview. Hopefully we weren't the interviewer that did this, but you've got this hiring manager who strings together this list of 5 or 6 contingent questions, and it's a lot, and it's coming right at you, and they want to get the most bang for their buck, but inevitably all of that gets lost in the sauce because nobody can follow, how they put that question together. So and hopefully that's not us when we ask those questions, but I'm sure we can all relate to when we've seen that happen. The second thing I would note when looking at this kind of pyramid and visual is that just because a question is at the bottom of the pyramid where you see it's less powerful, it doesn't mean it's not important, right? And so depending on your goal, sometimes a short and simple yes or no is exactly what you need, right? And you accomplish what you needed out of that conversation and out of that question. I think about attorneys, right? They kind of live in that say less, answer yes or no questions, and that's kind of where they live, and they train their clients to answer that way. It reminds me a lot, this diagram reminds me a lot of crisis prevention and intervention training, CPI training, that I've done for several years now, where you have an information seeking question versus a challenging question. And so an information seeking question, so at the bottom of the pyramid is, do we have recess today? That is a legit question. It's not a powerful question. It's a less powerful question. We need to answer that question. There's still validity to that. Whereas a challenging question could be, why do I have to do that? You see why at the top of that triangle. Again, both important questions that we need to answer. And depending on the context and the environment and the student and the relationship, we know that why do I have to do that? It is all about how it's said, right? So it's not, you've all heard it, it's not what you say, it's how you say it. This brings tone into play here, right? And tone is important. And it's human behavior, right? We are analyzing situations constantly. And just as a word of caution, sometimes when we ask the question why, which is a very powerful question, as you see, it emotes defensiveness, right? Immediately, why are you asking me why? What did I do wrong? What do I need to say? It's kind of this challenging, this friction. So again, I encourage you as leaders and folks, hopefully, that go back to your organizations and start to implement these things. Why is a great question, but be careful how you ask it and the context in which you ask it in. This visual has proven really helpful for me as I work to create agendas and topics of discussion for our teams. It identifies the characteristics on the left side, but it also gives me a cheat sheet of how to start those questions on the right. So this is something that I keep close by, especially right after our SLP journey, Cindy. But right now, it's one of those things where I don't necessarily need to have that reference sheet because I use it so much. So just words of wisdom there, I guess. So slide 8, as we get into scope is very straightforward, right? Second dimension is scope. It's more. How do we encompass more people, more time? How do we make more of an organizational impact in the questions that we ask? The most relevant example that I can think of for this crew would be when I think about the history of the Excel Center, right? The 10, 11, 12 years ago, the question was asked, how do we award, or can we award, a state accredited high school diploma? And the answer to that question was yes. And so now the scope has to grow. Okay, oh goodness, now we can do this. How do we make sure we're doing it to the best of our abilities? How do we do this? And if you remember back to year 1, you've all heard the stories, we weren't that good at it, right? So that changed to then how do we best serve adult learners? It wasn't online, it needed to be in person. Life coaches, we learned the role that they play in the success of our students. So again, the scope continues to grow. Then the conversation shifts to, okay, now we can award it. We're getting pretty good at it. How do we raise that bar on certifications and post-secondary opportunities for our students, right? So again, larger impact. Just in my time here with the Excel Center, I think I'm coming up on year 7. You know, it thrills me to know that the conversations in the drop-in centers and the YLCCs is like, how do we make this the most meaningful experience for our littlest learners, right? How do we make sure that they're pre-K and kindergarten ready? So you're really looking at that 2-gen impact. And what I've heard recently, it may have been amplified or sped up by the situation that we're all facing, but it's how do we support that whole family unit, however that is defined. And so again, if you think about just the initial scope was how do I award a diploma? Now we're talking about changing families' trajectories. Those are the kind of questions that we really want to encourage you to start asking when you're thinking about scope. And then so the third dimension is assumptions and beliefs. There's a lot going on here, but a lot of this will really be helpful as you kind of parse through this. But because of the nature of language, communication, human behavior, and experience, almost all questions have some level of assumption and belief baked into them. So we have to be aware of it. We have to be cognizant of it and make sure that we are addressing it when we see it. So as you read through that list of ways to kind of challenge our thinking on the right side, I would add questions that start such as, you know, what can we learn from this experience, right? I think that's a very powerful question to ask. What new possibilities are out there because of this experience? And I've heard that question asked a lot lately as I work with the Excel Centers across the country is what are we going to take from COVID-19 and use that as a best practice moving forward? We were forced to think outside of the box and come up with something in a hurry, but we found that there are some things that we can use and will make our model better, right? So just continuously probing with those questions will prove helpful. As kind of a final note on this slide, questions that I've heard staff ask, I would probably say I've asked them too and did not mean it, is when and I've seen it at orientation a lot. So when life coaches or people are talking about the life coaching model, which is new to most folks that are coming into the school setting, it's what barriers do you have to your education? Or how can I remove any barriers that you have? I think we're making while that's good intention, and well, you know, we're trying to do what we do best, there's some danger in those questions. We're assuming that there are barriers, right? And we are, you know, so just be cautious with that language. And I think creating as I love that team in Arkansas, they've created this culture where it's okay to talk about these, you know, to call that out, right? You know, that's not something that we need to be talking. We need to reframe our questioning. And so we're fortunate at the Excel Center, right? We have a mission that is very student driven. And a lot of organizations, it's a binder on a shelf, it's a poster on a wall, and you don't talk about it. You can't even recite it. We live it. And so I think using that at the center of all of our decision making, and when we're talking about assumptions and beliefs, you know, it guides our hiring, it guides our training, it guides our onboarding, it guides our curriculum, our offerings. Being student centered drives everything that we do. But I know I'm guilty of it myself. When we get in that problem solving mode as administrators or whatever our role is, we kind of lose sight of that sometimes. And so making sure that that mission and that student is at the center of all of your decisions and is your guiding light is something that will really help us in your organization as we continue to serve students in whatever this next school year looks like. And then finally, for me, before I kick it over to Cindy, you see some examples of powerful questions. They're trying to get at the same thing, they're just asked differently, right? And so you can see what's more thought-provoking. I think for me, as I was preparing for this conversation, it hit home with me, Cindy. It was, I've coached a lot of sports, college, high school. Now I coach all youth sports, which it's a great time, but it is challenging, right? And I've always kind of my introductory meeting to my students to my athletes is, play hard, play smart, have fun, and be better today than you were yesterday. Stealing a lot from legendary coach John Wooden. That's an Indiana thing. Sorry. So every day in the car after practice or in the locker room, we'll revisit those conversations. Did you get better today? Well, the easy answer is, yeah, Dad, I got better. So I tried it last night and then switched my thinking to how did you get better today? And how are you going to be better tomorrow than you were today? And so, just by shifting just one word, a simple wording of a question, I got a much more specific response from my 10-year-old son about what he was going to do at the next practice to be better than he was today. And so that was really kind of an aha moment for me, something that I've just been entrenched in my ways for years. And if I shift my thinking and ask better questions, I'm going to get better responses. So as Cindy takes over, I think I would encourage you in your breakout rooms and when you're back in your buildings, right? Ask yourself, is my question genuine? Do I really want to know this answer? Do we really not know this answer? And does it provoke more questions and different questions? I think if you ask yourself those two things, and with what Cindy's about to share with us, I think you'll get a lot of bang for your buck out of this 2 sessions and when you take this forward with your teams.
Thank you, sir. So we're going to dig into what is action learning and how do you use it? How many people, just by show of hands really quickly, or if you're not visual and you want to unmute and say me, how many folks have actually used action learning for problem solving? Excellent. So we got about 4. Our action learning coaches didn't raise their hands. That makes 6. So I want to give you just a little bit of an overview of action learning, what it involves. So action learning takes an adaptive challenge, and it looks at using powerful questions to dig deeper, find the underlying causes, identify any assumptions as Mark has talked about, any biases, unconscious bias that we may have that's affecting our decision making. So with action learning, you're going to identify your adaptive challenge, you're going to define the challenge, and then you're going to focus on the most critical adaptive elements. So the way in which we do that is we consider the adaptive challenge. We're going to use an action learning group that's going to question you about your problem, help you to identify a potential action plan. You would try out the plan, and then you're going to, as I've said earlier, monitor and adjust. So take note of what did work, what didn't work, and then you retool. Action learning is not if you're someone who loves to complete a project so you can check it off your task list, that is not action learning. Action learning is an ever-living process. So you may try a solution to a problem and it just isn't quite the perfect fit. Then you can go through the action learning process again and retool and identify new and additional solutions. So what is an adaptive challenge? One of the resources that we'll give you after this is over are several articles, journal articles, empirical research that's been done on this process. And Johnston and Berger said, what we think of as a problem is a gap between the outcomes you want and the actual results of the state of the system. So we're trying to look at what we think is the problem and where we want to be in the future and what's the gap that's preventing us from being there. So the adaptive challenge can be anything. It can be a project, a task, it can be a challenge, an opportunity. It does not have to be, it can be important to an individual, team, or organization. So it's not limited to just, oh, this isn't relevant to the entire company, so it's not an adaptive challenge. It can be at the individual level as well. And then it could be problems with no known solutions or with too many solutions. So maybe you can't come up with a way to solve the problem, and you need help with that. Or maybe you've got so many solutions, you don't know which one's the right one. Or you may not even be solving the right problem. I will say, in the many times that I have been through this process, it has never been the challenge that I initially brought. Marcus, was it yours? Yeah, he's shaking his head no.
Not even close.
So framing the challenge, y'all are going to be our guinea pigs today. We've never done this process electronically or virtually through Zoom. So we're going to see how this goes. But typically you would have this framing challenge in front of you so that you can kind of connect to what type of question are you asking. But you're really wanting to look at that desired future state. Where are you currently, and defining that? Where are you wanting to be, and what's the gap that's preventing you from being there? What are the factors that are having weight and pushing in on that reaching that desired state? So it could be political, economic, social, technological challenges, things outside your control that you can't control at all. It could be internal factors, so it doesn't even have to be external. It could be you have a very limiting mindset about this particular challenge. You have a manager who has been completely ineffective in their job. What about your mindset about their performance is preventing them from being successful? So what do you own in that? And then what assumptions are you making that are preventing you from solving your problem? So action learning overview, it's a very simple process. You're going to form a group. Typically that's going to be a group that's no more than 8 people. It's ideal that they be from diverse backgrounds. So we've got a perfect situation here because I don't know that any of you know each other. Maybe you do. You know a few, but not all. But you've got varying backgrounds. You've got varying opinions. You're going to identify an action learning coach. The coach is not there to solve your problem. The coach is there to facilitate the process. So Marcus and I and Tammy and Tennille will be facilitating those breakouts, unless we're doing fewer breakouts based on the number. I'm not sure, Marcus. We will be facilitating those, and our sole role is to make sure the process is flowing, that we're following the rules, which I'm going to go over here in a moment, that we're only asking questions and giving statements in response to those questions. We're not chasing squirrels. We're not bringing in topics that are irrelevant. We're not bringing in solutions when we should be asking questions, and that we're framing questions to be powerful questions, not closed-ended questions. So then you would present the problem. So we've got multiple people in the group, and we'll go through the process we're going to take to identify the one challenge that will be worked on today. You'll present your problem to the group. The group will then ask you powerful questions for clarity. So they're going to ask you questions to help you think, to help the group think, as far as what is the real underlying issue. And then the group's going to come back together considering all they've heard, and they're going to reframe the problem. So they're going to say, after I've heard all these questions and your answers to the questions, this is what I really think your challenge is. And then we're going to see, does the group agree? If the group agrees, we reflect on that learning. And if the group doesn't agree, then we start all over until we do reach consensus. So today's action learning process, we've kind of gone through what that's going to look like, but you're going to be in your group breakout sessions when we come back from break. Each one of you will need to, in 60 to 90 seconds, summarize what your leadership challenge is. Like I said, this is an urgent, real problem you have in your life today. Does not have to be work-based, can be personal if you can't think of one that's professional. And so you're going to share that out in 60 to 90 seconds. The group will hear all of the group's challenges. As a group, you'll identify, hey, we really want to focus on this one and helping them solve this problem. And so they will then become the challenge owner. The rest of the group will ask questions of that challenge owner, and the challenge owner will answer them. Once everyone's asked their questions, then you'll move on to the reframing process. And you'll have your action learning coach there to help you with that. Some examples of questions you may want to ask today. What are you willing to change? Where are you struggling? What have you tried? Why is this important? Excuse me. What caused this to happen? What are your options? Why haven't you tried? What haven't you told us? What does success look like to you? What feels impossible? And then my all-time favorite that my team gets really tired of me asking is, what do you own in this? So this is just some examples if you get stuck. Your action learning coach can also help if you get stuck. But I see Brian, we're taking a picture. And this won't be up, so if you want to take a quick picture, that's good. But these are some of the questions that can help facilitate that. And what do you see is the common theme in all of these? None of them are closed-ended questions. None of them are statements. None of them are, have you tried X, Y, Z? So just keep in mind that you want to frame them as powerful questions. That will be in the PowerPoint for you, but it's just a list of references if you want to look back at those articles. And that's where we are, Marcus, right on time for break.
Man, perfect, just like we planned, right? So team, as appreciate you guys. I know that was a lot of information. This will get very interactive very quickly. So you'll notice in the agenda that you got from Katie that there are 2 separate Zoom links. So we're actually going to close this one down, and then I'll open the other one up around 2:05. So you actually have about 15 minutes to get up, stretch, take care of yourself before we jump back into your breakout rooms with your action learning coaches. So again, close the link and then
Are there any questions that anybody has before we jump off? Because we'll be going straight into breakouts when we come back.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
All right. Well, I will enjoy your break, and I will open up the other room at 2:05.
Thank you, guys.
See ya.